Welcome back to Grok Talk, brought to you by GraniteGrok.com and CNHT, the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. Their CNHT Annual Family Picnic is coming up on July 9th. Get your tickets online at cnht.org, or you can pay at the door. This is their big fundraiser of the year. Space is limited. It is in Manchester, though. All right, our next guest has been a D.C. correspondent for LifeSite News. He is formerly the primary blogger for Tea Party Patriots. It's been published by National Review, Roll Call, Podair.com, Huffington Post, Real Clear Politics, and numerous other publications. He's also the co-author of the book Bankrupt Legacy, The Future of the Debt-Paying Generation. Please welcome to the program Dustin Siggins. Good morning, sir.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the show. So I read this, and I didn't know about Stanton Healthcare. What's this all about?
Well, it's a really interesting story. So I published it at The Stream, where I'm currently the associate editor. And it was really interesting because, like you said, a lot of us are connected in the pro-life community. I know several people with pregnancy care clinic organizations. Never heard of Stanton Healthcare. Turns out that Brandy Swindell founded the group 10 years ago, and taken them from a small clinic to now having a traveling maternity care home, like a bus of sorts, if you will. I don't know how to, a mobile clinic, if you will. And then she also has several other stationary clinics, and she's looking to expand in several states in Washington, D.C. in the next, as she put it to me, 6 to 24 months. So, and her goal is to, quote, replace Planned Parenthood, end quote, by putting her clinics right next to Planned Parenthood clinics, putting a big sign saying things like free ultrasound and free counseling and other things that women are often looking for in crisis pregnancies. It's really a fascinating story.
It is a fascinating story, and I think that it's one that we definitely want people to know about. What makes her different?
Well, I think that part of the goal is to take away, and let me start over. What she told me was that they're planning to do market research. They're not up and running yet on this, but they plan to do market research on who Planned Parenthood targets in the different communities. So, for example, in Boise, Idaho, there's not a lot of ethnic diversity, but Planned Parenthood does target a lot of Hispanics up there. Mm-hmm. Whereas, somewhere between, depending which numbers you look at, 30 and 38% of abortions in the U.S. are done to black babies, but black Americans only make up about 13% of the U.S. population. So if they make it into more urban centers, I'm sure they will look to people who are being targeted by Planned Parenthood for abortions in those communities as well. So the goal is to take away Planned Parenthood's supply of customers by having them be more attracted to big signs, friendly people, friendly nurses, the counseling, etc. And I think people have to go to Planned Parenthood to get an abortion. They have to actively go inside. If you provide these people other alternatives, you don't have to have, I think, and again, I'm speaking here as a reporter and a blogger, not an expert on the issue, on the inside workings of pro-life pregnancy care clinics. But it seems to me that if you take away Planned Parenthood's customers, they will be replaced. They will be going out of business because there's also all these laws, as I'm sure you know, across the country, scores of laws that are protecting the unborn and the mothers from being targeted by Planned Parenthood.
So how is this being financed?
She told me it's purely private. It's purely privately financed. Only Planned Parenthood, which gets about 41% of its funding from state governments, federal governments, they are totally privately funded. She didn't get into who funds them, and I didn't really ask. But yeah, totally privately funded, unlike Planned Parenthood. And in fact, there are several thousand pro-life pregnancy care centers, as well as something along the lines of 450 maternity homes and 250 adoption centers all across the country. And the vast majority of them are privately funded. A few get funding from the state governments, like in Florida, and I believe South Carolina, but I could be wrong. Under Jeb Bush, Florida provided some money for pregnancy care centers. But for the most part, these are privately funded and run by volunteers and run by people who care about women and their children.
So here in New Hampshire, we have something called CareNet, which provides counseling services, adoption services.
I'm from New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Oh, you are?
Yeah. So you're probably aware of CareNet then. As I say, they provide adoption services, counseling, try to get the mother and father to actually work it out and get married, all sorts of things to help help the baby have a family instead of getting destroyed.
Well, and that's one of the cool things. So I live in Northern Virginia, but I'm originally from the Littleton area in New Hampshire, and I knew of CareNet, but they were. I'm a 30-year-old virgin, so in college it wasn't a big deal to me. Abortion was simply an academic question, if you will, because it wasn't part of my life. But since I've become involved in the pro-life movement, I've gotten to know the Northwest Pregnancy Center in D.C., which has a maternity home for several women, and they see, I believe, over 1,000 people a year for counseling who come in for counseling on their children and whatnot. And every year at their major fundraiser, they have one or two people who they've helped come up and speak to something along the lines of 250 to 300 people who are paying $90 a pop to get in the door. And they come up and speak about how they were provided home for a year, counseling, education for work, but how to take care of their children. And it's almost always black women, and they're almost always young. And so it's really been fascinating to see, you hear a lot in the media about, these groups that lie, the pro-life centers lie. In reality, they're providing a valuable resource to women who are often abandoned. It takes two to tango, as they say, and I understand it takes two people to make a kid. So oftentimes, these women are alone. These women are being pushed into abortion. They're choosing life, and pro-life centers provide the financial, spiritual, psychological resources so they can do that, make that decision.
Yeah, and that's fabulous. It's like the CareNet folks in New Hampshire do that kind of thing, and they have an annual banquet which we go to anytime we can, and they charge people to get in the door to help raise money, and they have speakers from around the country, maybe even people who have written books on the topic, and generally a pretty good thing. So again, Stanton Healthcare is this organization, and where can people find out more about that?
Stanton, Stanton, StantonHealthcare.org, actually. Also, they can find it through my article at the screen. And actually, Cosmopolitan had a really nice profile of them, surprisingly so, given the pro-abortion leanings of Cosmopolitan. So people can check out any one of those three places, screen.org, where I published my piece, Cosmopolitan, or StantonHealthcare.org.
So let's talk. We're right down the hall from New Hampshire Right to Life. Jane Cormier, who's the current president of this particular organization, is a regular contributor at GraniteRock.com. We spend a lot of time talking to her, and she likes to update us on the progress with regard to the life issue, not just in New Hampshire but nationally. You've written for LifeSite News. Obviously, this is something that you're aware of. What's your take on the choice versus life issue right now?
We, if you look at the arc, we're winning in terms of winning, hearts and minds. Legislatively, in terms of banning abortion, in terms of saving the unborn children, the official number is that we have about 1 million abortions a year. The numbers are always about 3 years out of date because it takes time to gather the data. But officially, and of course, the CDC's numbers are actually not as accurate, so to speak, as Guttmacher, which is a pro-abortion research group. So we're relying here on a former research arm of Planned Parenthood. But Guttmacher estimates we're about 1 million abortions a year. That does not include a lot of abortion-inducing drugs and devices, like the IUD and whatnot. So we're still over 1 million abortions a year. So I would say that, on a day-to-day, year-to-year basis, we're losing, frankly. And even despite what happened with Planned Parenthood last year, they kept all their federal funding.
Right.
So on that level, is the arc in our favor? Yes. Is that arc curving as fast as we really would, as it ought to? I have to, unfortunately, say the answer is probably no.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's get back to Stanton Healthcare. Now, you spoke to Brandy.
She was a riot.
Yeah.
Brandy was a riot to talk to. I call them, and I usually, as a reporter, I try to give them, any organization, about 4 or more hours to get back to the story, even if one I'm pushing hard. And in this case, I gave them 2 hours because I was on a fast turnaround. And I get a call, and she's in the car driving to a meeting or something. And I quoted her fairly substantially in my article, but I probably had to cut half of what she gave me. And she says to me, well, I want to give you plenty to work with. And I said, I think it's probably because you're really extroverted and really passionate. And she goes, yeah, that could also be true.
Is that the young lady pictured on their website with the streaks in her hair? And is that tattoos? She looks like a character.
I don't know her personally. But again, she was, the 13 minutes that we talked on the phone, it was really a lot of fun. She was very outgoing, very passionate, She knew her numbers. She knew what she wanted to do with her organization.
Mm-hmm.
And she's actually, she's very well connected in the pro-life movement. Reverend Patrick Mahoney from the Christian Defense Coalition was a founding board member of Stanton Healthcare. And she's been an activist before. And so I think it's great, frankly, to see a lot of times in the pro-life movement, it's mission-oriented and doesn't always have the business sense behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I don't mean to be disparaging anybody. It's a great movement. We do a lot of great stuff. But as in any mission organization, you're often more focused on the mission than the business side of things. And it seems like Stanton Healthcare has become very effective in both. Because look at the way they keep expanding, state-of-the-art clinics, and their mission matches their business growth. So it's been very impressive to me on that level.
Well, okay, so you've talked to Brandy. Obviously, she seems to have a lot of energy and drive to make this happen. Did she give you any clue about how fast they plan on expanding?
She said there were several locations that they were, some auxiliary locations they're planning to open in the next 6 to 24 months, if I remember correctly, Washington, D.C., Alabama, and I think 1 or 2 other states. So they're looking at if those numbers hold true, obviously there's always stuff that can get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
But that means within 12 years they've grown from 1 location to something like 7 or 8. And they're planning to have regional headquarters as well as individual clinics. So they're really going to have a very comprehensive business structure set up within the next 2 years. And they already have 4 or 5 locations, including one in Ireland. They've expanded very rapidly in the last 10 years.
Do you know if a lot of the pro-life movement, the conservatives, people who are interested in actual women's health care, like to focus on, you have a lot of these abortion clinics and Planned Parenthood in particular that aren't required to comply with the same sort of health care standards as other health care clinics. Do you happen to know if this is something that Swindell is focusing on to actually have that kind of quality built in?
Stanton, you mean?
Stanton Healthcare, but Randy Swindell is the.
I don't know if she's focused on that in her activism. Mm-hmm. We specifically talked about her organization kind of at the 50,000 foot level because she only had about 12 minutes to chat.
In the car.
Literally in the car, and you could hear the wind in the background. It was a riot. It was a great conversation. I do know that obviously Texas is having its case heard in the Supreme Court. That could be out any day on whether or not it's somehow it might be unconstitutional to require higher standards for abortion clinics, even though people like Leroy Carhart, who's in Germantown, Maryland, and in Nebraska, he works 7 days a week, traveling back and forth to all these abortions, and he has sent at least 4, might be as many as 6, I'd have to go double check, but at least 4 women to hospitals in the last 6 to 8 months. And yet when the Congressional Committee investigating fetal harvesting looked into him, Democrats are defending him. Democrats are actually defending people who send women to hospitals on a regular basis.
It's awful. Well, I want to thank you for bringing this. We're going to quote this article, and we're going to point people to this website because this is very exciting, and I think a lot of people will want to get behind her and give their support, not just on the Internet, but maybe support financially as well. And we wouldn't know about this without you, so thanks so much for doing that. How do people reach you if they are so inclined, or if you'd care to share any of that information?
Yeah, they can find me twitter.com/Dustin Siggins. I'm also at the stream.org, the stream. My profile's on there. And you can also Google me and find all the cool, good, bad, and whatever other stuff I've written in the last 6 years.
All right. Well,
if I may...
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, if I may make one last note, is that you mentioned funding earlier. Pro-life pregnancy care centers run on very little funding, considering the good work they do. And the pro-life movement is where most of its money goes, into diapers and into helping women. But it'd be great if your listeners and your readers could be able to take, what they can and offer their time and offer their money to help, especially as mostly minority women being targeted by Planned Parenthood. And pro-life pregnancy care centers provide the alternative to abortion clinics.
All right, sir. Thank you so much. You have a great weekend.
Thank you.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. We're out of time. We got to go. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Excellent. Rock Talk.